Captain Lee Hana's eyes slowly opened to cold metal walls and dim purple light. Her head felt like someone had hit it with a hammer. The last thing she remembered was her patrol ship spinning out of control, alarms screaming as alien fighters surrounded her. Now she was somewhere else entirely. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Sharp pain shot through her wrists where thick metal bands held her arms to the wall. The restraints glowed with a sickly orange light and felt hot against her skin. When she pulled against them, they burned hotter, making her gasp and stop struggling. The room was small and windowless, carved from some kind of dark stone that seemed to absorb light. Strange symbols covered the walls, glowing faintly like dying embers. The air smelled wrong, too clean, with an underlying chemical tang that made her nose wrinkle. Everything about this place felt alien and hostile. Heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Hana's heart started beating faster, which worried her more than the approaching danger. She'd been born with a weak heart, something the military doctors had almost kept her out of the defense force for. Under normal stress, she was fine, but extreme fear or pain could trigger dangerous, irregular rhythms that might kill her. The door slid open with a mechanical hiss. 3 creatures walked in, and Hana had to force herself not to recoil. They looked like giant insects that had learned to walk upright. Their bodies were covered in hard, dark shells that clicked when they moved. Multiple arms ending in sharp claws hung at their sides, but their faces were the worst part. Compound eyes like black jewels, and mandibles that clicked constantly as they spoke. The largest one stepped forward, its voice a buzzing rasp that hurt her ears. "Human female, you are awake. Good. I am Interrogator Vector of the Vorthak Empire. You will tell us what we wish to know." Hana kept her expression blank, the way they'd trained her. "Captain Lee Hana, Terran Defense Force, Service Number 7794 Alpha. The SAM." Alien's mandibles clicked faster, which she guessed meant irritation. "We care nothing for your primitive rituals. We know you were patrolling the border systems. We know your ship carried classified navigation data. You will give us the locations of your hidden military bases." "I don't know what you're talking about," Hana lied smoothly. Vector moved closer, and she could smell something like rotting flowers on its breath. "Your species fascinates us, human. So weak, so fragile. Yet you spread across the galaxy like a disease. We have studied many of your kind. We know how to make you talk." One of the other aliens wheeled in a complex machine covered in wires and blinking lights. At the end of a mechanical arm, a cluster of thin metal probes gleamed like needles. Hana's heart rate spiked when she saw it. "This device reads minds," Vector explained, almost conversationally. "It will dig through your thoughts like claws through soft earth. Most species break within minutes. Humans typically last an hour before their minds shatter completely." The machine hummed to life, and the probes began to glow with the same orange light as her restraints. Hana could feel her pulse hammering in her throat. This was exactly the kind of extreme stress her doctors had warned her about. Her heart was already struggling to maintain a steady rhythm. "Last chance, human. Tell us, willingly, and we will make your death quick." Hana met the creature's alien gaze and smiled grimly. "Go to hell." Vector's mandibles spread in what might have been a smile. "As you wish. Begin the procedure." The probes moved toward her head, and Hana closed her eyes, trying to slow her racing heart before it killed her. The cold metal probes touched Hana's temples like ice against her skin. She tried to jerk her head away, but the restraints held her firmly in place. Vector adjusted the machine's controls with practiced precision, his multiple arms moving across the alien interface, like a twisted pianist preparing for a deadly concert. "Beginning neural extraction," the creature announced to his companions. 2 other Vorthak stood behind him, watching data stream across floating holographic displays. Numbers and symbols she couldn't read scrolled past in rivers of light at Ye. First, nothing happened. Hana almost allowed herself to hope that human brains were too different for their technology to work. Then the probes began to warm against her skin, and a strange tingling sensation crept into her skull like tiny insects crawling through her thoughts. The tingling became pressure. The pressure became pain. It started as a dull ache behind her eyes, the kind she got from staring at computer screens too long. but it grew steadily worse, spreading through her head like liquid fire. Hannah gritted her teeth and tried to focus on her training. Think about something else. Recite regulations. Remember the multiplication tables. Resistance detected, one of the monitoring aliens reported. Increasing penetration depth. The machine's hum grew louder, and the pain exploded into something beyond description. It felt like someone was driving hot needles through her brain while simultaneously crushing her skull in a vice. Hannah's vision went white, then red, then began to fragment into dancing spots of color. But worse than the pain was the invasion itself. She could feel alien minds pressing against her thoughts like cold fingers rifling through her memories. Every embarrassing moment, every fear, every private thought she'd ever had was suddenly exposed and vulnerable. The Vorthek minds felt nothing. Like human consciousness, they were sharp and angular, cutting through her mental defenses like razor wire. Her heart began to race as panic set in. This was exactly what her doctors had warned her about. Under extreme stress, her weak heart could go into dangerous arrhythmia. She could actually die from fear before the aliens got what they wanted. The irony would have been funny if she wasn't. Too terrified to laugh. Accessing surface memories, Vector announced with satisfaction. I see her childhood. Fear of dark spaces. Loss of parents in the colony wars. Excellent. Trauma makes the mind more pliable. Hannah watched helplessly as her most painful memories played out on the alien displays like a twisted home movie. Her parents' funeral when she was 12. Her first day at the military academy, scared and alone. The night she'd cried herself to sleep after her first combat mission went wrong. Go deeper, Vector ordered. Find the military protocols. The probes grew hotter against her temples. The alien minds pressed harder, digging through layers of memory like archaeologists excavating her past. Hannah tried to build mental walls to hide the information they wanted, but it was like trying to stop a flood with her bare hands. Her pulse hammered so fast now that she could barely catch her breath. Sweat poured down her face despite the cold. Cell. The cardiac monitor attached to her chest began beeping frantically as her heart struggled to cope with the stress. Subject's vital signs are becoming erratic, one of the monitoring aliens reported with clinical detachment. Irrelevant, Vector replied without looking away from the data streams. Continue extraction. We're close to the classified sectors. The pain reached a crescendo that made Hannah scream despite her determination to stay silent. Through the agony, she felt the alien minds finally break through her deeper defenses and begin sorting through her military training, her mission briefings, her knowledge of base locations and defense protocols. Her heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of her chest. The rhythm was becoming increasingly irregular, skipping beats and racing wildly. She was running out of time. Time became meaningless in the interrogation chamber. What felt like days could have been hours, or maybe just minutes, stretched into eternity by pain. Hannah's world had shrunk to nothing but the burning agony in her skull and the desperate struggle of each breath. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, rapid gasps as her heart worked overtime, trying to keep her alive under the relentless assault. The Vorthak had been at this for what seemed like forever, their alien patience far exceeding human endurance. Every few minutes, Vector would increase the machine's power when her mental defenses started to rebuild. Each escalation brought fresh waves of torture that made the previous level seem gentle by comparison. Subject is showing increased resistance in Sector 7, one of the monitoring aliens reported, its voice as emotionless as a computer. Recommend power increase to level 9. Agreed, Vector replied, his clawed hand hovering over the controls. These humans are more stubborn than expected, but every species breaks eventually. The machine's hum climbed to a higher pitch, and suddenly electricity joined the mental invasion. Sharp jolts of current ran through the probes into Hannah's brain, making her muscles spasm uncontrollably. Her back arched against the restraints as her nervous system went haywire. The taste of copper filled her mouth as she bit down hard on her tongue. The electrical shocks came in waves, each one perfectly timed to hit when her mind was most vulnerable from the psychic intrusion. It was a calculated torture designed to break down every defense at once. Her thoughts scattered like leaves in a hurricane as the alien minds pressed deeper, rifling through memories she hadn't accessed in years. Her heart rate had become dangerously erratic. The cardiac monitor attached to her chest showed a rhythm that would have sent any human doctor into emergency mode. But the Vorthak barely glanced at the readings, focused entirely on the streams of extracted data flowing across their displays. "We're accessing military protocols now," Vector announced with satisfaction. "Increase power to maximum. We'll have everything within the hour." The machine screamed to life at full intensity. The electrical currents surged through Hana's brain, like lightning, while the psychic probes tore through her consciousness with the subtlety of a wrecking ball. Pain beyond description consumed her entire existence. She couldn't even scream anymore. Her throat had seized up completely. That's when her heart finally gave up. The irregular rhythm that had been struggling for hours suddenly stuttered, skipped several beats, then stopped entirely. The cardiac monitor's steady beeping dissolved into one long continuous tone that filled the chamber with its electronic wail of death. Hana's body went completely limp in the restraints. Her head lolled forward as her muscles lost all tension. Her skin began to turn pale, then slightly blue as oxygen stopped circulating through her bloodstream. The rise and fall of her chest ceased completely, but the Vorthak didn't notice. They were too focused on their precious data extraction to pay attention to something as minor as their subject dying. Their species didn't understand mammalian physiology well enough to recognize the signs of cardiac arrest. To them, unconsciousness was just another level of extraction efficiency. "Excellent," Vector buzzed excitedly, as classified information continued to flow from Hana's dying brain. "The humans' defenses have collapsed completely. We're accessing the deepest military files now." The other aliens clicked their mandibles, in approval, recording everything as fast as their systems could process it. They had no idea that they were stealing memories from a corpse, that the human they'd captured was already 30 seconds into clinical death. The machine continued. Its work, probes still glowing against Hana's temples, as her brain slowly began to die from lack of oxygen. Her heart remained completely still in her chest, a silent organ that had finally been pushed beyond its limits. The monitors continued their deathly wail, but the Vorthak were too absorbed in their victory to care about alarm sounds. The explosions started as distant rumbles that made the interrogation chamber's walls vibrate. At first, the Vorthak ignored them, too focused on extracting the final pieces of classified data from Hana's dying brain. But when the second wave of blasts hit closer to their section, even Vector looked up from his precious displays. "What is happening?" he demanded, his mandibles clicking with irritation. "I ordered no interruptions during extraction." Before anyone could answer, the lights flickered and went out completely. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. Somewhere in the distance, alien voices were shouting orders in their harsh, buzzing language. 3 levels below, Park Ji-ho pressed himself against his cell door and listened to the chaos echoing through the prison ship's corridors. He'd been waiting for this moment ever since the Vorthak had dragged him aboard 2 days ago. While they thought he was just another captured human to be interrogated later, Ji-ho had been carefully preparing his escape. The medic pulled a thin piece of metal from inside his boot, a surgical tool he'd managed to hide during his capture. Over the past 48 hours, he'd been slowly working it into the door's locking mechanism whenever the guards weren't watching. The explosions he'd been hearing meant other human ships had finally found them. This was his chance. The lock clicked open just as another blast shook the ship. Ji-ho slipped into the corridor, moving quietly despite the alarms blaring overhead. His medical training had taught him to stay calm under pressure, and right now that skill was keeping him alive. 2 Vortak guards came rushing around the corner, their weapons ready, but they were looking ahead toward the source of the explosions, not checking the shadows behind them. Ji-ho grabbed a piece of broken metal from the floor and struck the first guard at the base of its skull where the exoskeleton was thinnest. The creature dropped instantly. The second guard spun around, raising its energy weapon, but Ji-ho was already moving. He tackled the alien around its middle, using his weight to drive it into the wall. The weapon clattered away as they struggled, but humans were stronger than the Vorthak expected. Within seconds, the second guard was unconscious too. Jiho picked up one of their weapons and kept moving. He'd memorized the ship's layout from conversations he'd overheard between guards. The interrogation chambers were 2 levels up, and if there were other humans aboard, that's where they'd be. He fought his way through corridors filled with smoke and sparking electronics. The ship was definitely under attack, probably a rescue mission launched when his and Hana's ships failed to report back. Every few meters, he had to hide or fight past more guards rushing toward the battle zones. When he finally reached the interrogation level, he could hear the continuous wail of medical alarms coming from one of the chambers. His heart sank. That sound usually meant someone was dying or already dead. He broke into a run following the noise. The door to the chamber was unlocked. The Vorthak inside were too distracted by their equipment to secure it properly. Jiho burst through to find 3 aliens standing around a human woman strapped to a torture device. The medical monitors were screaming warnings, and her body hung limp in the restraints. He didn't hesitate. The first alien went down from an energy blast to its back. The second turned toward him, mandibles spread in surprise, but Jiho was already diving forward. His shoulder caught the creature in its midsection, sending it crashing into the wall. The third alien, the one with elaborate markings that marked it as the leader, raised some kind of control device, but Jiho was faster, grabbing the creature's arm and breaking it with a sharp twist. The alien shrieked and collapsed. Then he saw Hana clearly for the first time. No pulse on the monitors, no breathing, skin already turning blue. She was dead and had been for at least a minute. But Jiho was a medic, and medics never gave up on saving lives. Jiho dropped his weapon and rushed to Hana's side, his medical training taking over completely. Her skin was cold and had turned a sickly blue color around her lips and fingertips. No pulse, no breathing, pupils fixed and dilated. By every medical standard he knew, she was dead. But dead didn't mean gone forever. Not yet. He ripped the alien restraints off her wrists and pulled her body down onto the floor. The metal was cold and hard, but it would have to do. Jiho tilted her head back, checked her airway for obstructions, then placed his hands on her chest and began compressions. "Come on, Hana," he whispered, pushing down hard and fast in the rhythm every medic learned by heart. "Don't you dare die on me now." The 3 Vorthak he'd knocked down were starting to recover, picking themselves up and hissing in their alien language. Vektar, the leader with the broken arm, pointed at Jiho with his good hand and barked orders. The other 2 raised their weapons, energy cells glowing as they prepared to fire. But then they stopped, frozen by something they'd never seen before. Jiho was breathing into Hana's lungs, his mouth covering hers as he forced air into her dead body. Then back to chest compressions, counting under his breath. 30 pushes, 2 breaths, repeat. His hands moved with mechanical precision, but sweat was already beading on his forehead from the effort. The aliens stared in complete confusion. In their experience, death was final. When a body stopped functioning, you disposed of it and moved on. They had never encountered a species that fought death itself with nothing but determination and bare hands. "What is it doing?" One of them buzzed to Vektar in their own language. "I do not know," the leader replied, his mandibles clicking uncertainly. Some primitive human ritual, perhaps. But as they watched, they began to realize this wasn't a ritual. This human was actually trying to make the dead one live again. The concept was so alien to their mindset that they couldn't even process it properly. They just stood there, weapons half raised, watching this impossible scene unfold. Jiho ignored them completely. His entire world had narrowed down to Hana's still form and the rhythm of CPR. Push, push, push. He could feel her ribs flexing under his hands with each compression. Her heart was just a muscle, and muscles could be forced to work again if you knew how. After 2 minutes of continuous chest compressions, he paused to check for a pulse. Nothing. Her skin was still blue, still cold. A normal person would have given up by now, but Jiho had seen too many impossible recoveries in his medical career to quit. He looked up at the alien monitoring equipment still humming around the room. Somewhere in that technological maze might be something he could use. Without stopping his compressions, he studied the devices with desperate eyes. There, a power coupling that fed energy to the interrogation probes. If he could reroute that. Current, modify the voltage. Maybe create a crude defibrillator. Keep your weapons on me if you want, he called out to the watching aliens without looking at them, but I'm going to tear apart your equipment now. Using one hand to maintain compressions on Hana's chest, he reached up with the other and yanked cables out of the nearest machine. Sparks flew as he disconnected power feeds and rerouted energy flows. The Vorthak watched in growing amazement as this human literally rebuilt their technology while simultaneously fighting death. Jiho's hands moved with desperate efficiency, twisting wires together and improvising connections that would have made any engineer proud. The aliens' confusion had turned to something approaching awe as they realized they were witnessing something beyond their understanding. A human refusing to let another human die, even when death seemed certain. Jiho's makeshift defibrillator was barely holding together, twisted alien wires and rerouted power cables that sparked dangerously with each connection. He'd managed to create two crude paddle-like contacts from pieces of the interrogation equipment, their surfaces crackling with electrical energy that made his hair stand on end. "This is going to hurt," he muttered, positioning the improvised paddles on Hana's chest. Her skin was still that terrible blue-gray color of death, and she hadn't moved in over 3 minutes now. Brain death was supposed to start after 4 minutes without oxygen. He was running out of time. The Vorthak continued to watch in stunned silence, their weapons forgotten as they witnessed something that challenged everything they thought they knew about biology. Vektar's broken arm hung uselessly at his side, but he made no move to call for help or stop this bizarre human ritual. Jiho triggered his crude defibrillator. The electrical shock ran through Hana's body, making her back arch off the floor. Her muscles contracted violently for a second, then went limp again. The monitors showed nothing. Still flatlined, still dead. "Come on," Jiho whispered, repositioning. "The paddles." "I know you're still in there," he shocked her again. This time her whole body convulsed, limbs jerking spastically before falling still. One of the watching aliens stepped backward involuntarily, a sound like a frightened hiss escaping. Its mandibles. The third shock was different. As the electricity coursed through Hana's body, something changed in the rhythm. Her back arched again, but this time when she fell back to the floor, her chest didn't remain perfectly still. A tiny, almost imperceptible rise and fall. Then another. Suddenly, Hana's eyes snapped open, and she gasped like someone who'd been drowning, sucking in air with desperate, ragged breaths. Her whole body shook as her nervous system rebooted itself, and she coughed violently, specks of blood appearing on her lips. The three Vorthak aliens stumbled backward as if they'd seen a ghost, which, in their understanding of the universe, they had. In all their species' history and all the races they'd conquered and studied, they had never seen the dead return to life. It was impossible. It went against every natural law they knew. "Impossible," Vektar whispered in his own language, his compound eyes wide with something approaching terror. "The dead cannot return. It is not possible." But Hana was definitely alive. Her eyes were open and aware, though they had a strange, distant quality that hadn't been there before. She looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time, taking in the alien equipment, the watching Vorthak, and finally Jiho kneeling beside her. "You brought me back," she said, her voice hoarse and strange. "I was somewhere else, somewhere dark and quiet. But you brought me back." Jiho helped her sit up, checking her pulse and breathing with practiced efficiency. "Your heart stopped for almost 4 minutes. You were clinically dead. How do you feel?" Hana blinked slowly, and when she looked at the alien interrogation equipment, something remarkable happened. The mental probes that had been tearing through her mind were still active, still trying to read her thoughts, but now they simply slid off her consciousness like water off glass. "I can't feel them anymore," she said with wonder, looking at the probes that had been torturing her minutes earlier. "They're machines. They can't get into my head now." The near-death experience had somehow rewired her brain, creating new neural pathways that the Vorthak technology couldn't penetrate. She had become immune to their most powerful weapon simply by dying and coming back. Vektar realized what this meant first. His species' entire interrogation methodology was useless against this human now. Worse, she had seen something that should have been impossible, proof that humans could literally conquer death itself. He reached for his communication device to call for reinforcements, but Hannah was already moving. Death had made her faster somehow, more focused. She grabbed Jiho's improvised weapon and fired in one smooth motion, dropping Vector before he could sound an alarm. The other two aliens finally overcame their shock and raised their weapons, but they were too slow. Jiho and Hannah worked together with the kind of coordination that only came from shared trauma, disarming their captors and leaving them unconscious on the floor. As alarms continued to wail throughout the ship, Hannah looked at her rescuer with eyes that had seen the other side of death and returned. Now let's get out of here. The corridors of the Vorthak prison ship had become a maze of smoke and flashing emergency lights. Hannah moved through them like a completely different person than the one who had been captured days earlier. Death had changed her in ways that went beyond just immunity to alien mind probes. Her reflexes were sharper, her awareness heightened, as if dying and coming back had stripped away everything unnecessary and left only pure survival instinct. Jiho stayed close behind her, covering their rear with one of the stolen Vorthak weapons. The energy rifle felt strange in his hands, too light with controls in all the wrong places, but it fired when he pulled the trigger, and that was all that mattered right now. They encountered their first group of guards at the corridor junction, leading to the main prison block. 3 Vorthak soldiers came around the corner at a run, their mandibles clicking rapid-fire commands to each other. But they stopped dead when they saw Hannah, their compound eyes going wide with recognition and something that looked like fear. "That is the dead human," one of them buzzed in their alien language, "the one that returned from death." The momentary hesitation was all Hannah and Jiho needed. She dropped low and swept the legs of the first guard, while Jiho stunned the second with his energy rifle. The third alien tried to raise an alarm, but Hannah was already moving, using the creature's own weapon against it before it could react. "They're afraid of you," Jiho observed as they stepped over the unconscious guards. "Word must be spreading about what happened in that interrogation room." Hannah checked the alien weapon she'd taken, familiarizing herself with its controls. Good. Fear makes people sloppy. They were right. As they fought their way deeper into the ship, they encountered more and more Vorthak, who seemed completely unprepared to deal with humans who had supposedly conquered death itself. Guards would freeze for crucial seconds, staring at Hannah as if she were some kind of supernatural creature. Officers would bark contradictory orders, unsure how to handle an enemy that their most advanced technology couldn't stop. The ship's communication system crackled to life overhead, broadcasting urgent messages in the Vorthak language. Even without understanding the words, Hannah and Jiho could hear the panic in the voices. Their escape was causing chaos throughout the entire vessel. "Hangar Bay should be 2 levels down," Jiho said, consulting a wall display showing the ship's layout. "But we'll have to go through the main security checkpoint." When they reached the checkpoint, they found it abandoned. The guards had apparently been called away to deal with other emergencies. Emergency blast doors were sealed, but Hannah quickly figured out how to override them using one of the control panels. Her enhanced mental state made the alien interface surprisingly easy to understand. The hangar bay stretched out before them like a cavern filled with strange angular spacecraft. Most were small fighter craft, but near the far wall sat something that made Jiho whistle in appreciation, a sleek scout ship that looked fast enough to outrun anything the Vorthak could throw at them. "There," Hannah pointed. "That one." They sprinted across the hangar floor, but halfway to their target, more alarms began blaring. Heavy blast doors started sliding shut at both ends of the bay, and armed Vorthak poured in from the side entrances. "Stop them," someone shouted in accented human language. "The dead one must not escape." Energy bolts sizzled through the air around them as they dove behind a maintenance cart. Hannah returned fire while Jiho worked on hot wiring the scout ship's entry hatch. The alien security systems were sophisticated, but his medical training had taught him to work with complex electronic devices under pressure. "Got it!" he called out as the hatch slid open. They made a final dash for the ship, dodging energy blasts and the clumsy attempts of terrified guards to tackle them. Once inside, Hannah's enhanced awareness let her understand the alien flight controls almost instinctively. The engines roared to life just as the hangar's blast doors finished sealing. "Hold on," she warned, and fired the ship's weapons at the nearest blast door. The explosion blew a hole large enough for them to fly through, and they shot out into space, just as Vorthak reinforcement ships were arriving. Behind them, the prison. Ship was listing badly, smoke pouring from the hangar breach. As they accelerated away from their captors, Jiho looked back at the chaos they'd left behind. "I don't think they'll be underestimating humans anymore." Hana's eyes were fixed on the stars ahead, but there was a small smile on her lips. "No, I don't think they will." The first report came through standard Vorthak military channels just hours after Hana and Jiho's escape. Commander Zekthar of the prison ship filed an official incident report that his superiors read with growing disbelief. 2 human prisoners had escaped after one of them returned from clinical death. The report was so unusual that it was immediately flagged for review by higher command. But official channels weren't the only way news traveled in space. The Vorthak crew members who had witnessed the impossible resurrection began talking to friends and family through private communication networks. Within a day, the story had spread to every Vorthak ship in the sector. "I'm telling you, I saw it with my own eyes," a junior technician told his mate over a secure video call. "The human female was dead. No heartbeat, no brain activity, nothing. Then the other human brought her back to life using nothing but his hands and some broken equipment." His mate's mandibles clicked skeptically. "That's impossible. Death is final. Everyone knows that." "That's what I thought too. But I watched it happen, and afterward our interrogation machines couldn't touch her mind anymore. It was like dying had made her immune to our technology." Similar conversations were happening across the Vorthak fleet. Soldiers, technicians, and officers were all sharing the same impossible story. The humans had done something that went against every natural law they understood. The story didn't stay within Vorthak space for long. Trade networks, diplomatic channels, and smuggler routes carried the tale to other alien civilizations. Each time it was retold, it grew a little larger, gained new details, became more extraordinary. The Zelani Republic, longtime enemies of the Vorthak, received the news with particular interest. Their intelligence networks had been tracking human expansion for years, trying to understand what made this young species so successful, despite their apparent physical weakness. "Fascinating," said Zelani Intelligence Director Morweth as she reviewed the reports. "If this is true, it changes everything we know about human capabilities." "You believe they can actually resurrect their dead?" asked her assistant. "I believe they never give up on each other," Morweth replied thoughtfully. "That may be even more dangerous than resurrection." The story reached the Krillian Syndicate through less official channels. Smugglers and traders brought tales of humans who conquered death itself, who refused to abandon their own kind even when all hope seemed lost. In the cantinas and trading posts of neutral space, the story grew with each telling. "I heard they can bring back anyone who's been dead less than an hour," one trader claimed to a mixed crowd of aliens from a dozen different species. "That's nothing," another voice called out. "My cousin's friend works for a shipping company. That deals with humans. He says they once saw a human crew revive someone who'd been frozen in space for 3 days. The stories weren't accurate, but they didn't need to be. What mattered was the impression they created, that humans were a species who simply refused to accept death as final, who would fight impossible odds to save their own kind." Back in Vorthak space, the political consequences were becoming clear. The prison ship incident had exposed a fundamental weakness in their interrogation methods. If humans could become immune to mind probes simply by dying and being revived, then the Vorthak's primary advantage in extracting information was gone. Emperor Vorthak himself called an emergency council meeting. The most powerful Vorthak leaders gathered in the imperial throne room, their usual confidence shaken by reports they couldn't quite believe. "How do we fight an enemy that refuses to stay dead?" demanded Admiral Kexthul, commander of the Third Fleet. "More importantly," added Intelligence Chief Vermoth, "how do we interrogate prisoners who can make themselves immune to our methods by temporarily dying?" The Emperor's compound eyes glittered with something that might have been fear. For centuries, the Vorthak Empire had built its power on the certainty that their technology was superior to any biological resistance. The idea that a species could adapt simply by experiencing death and returning from it was beyond their understanding. Perhaps, he said slowly, we have underestimated these humans. Similar conversations were happening in council chambers and command centers across known space. The story of two humans who had escaped the unescapable Vorthak prison was forcing every alien civilization to reconsider their assumptions about humanity. They were no longer just another young species spreading through the galaxy. They were something else entirely, beings who could literally conquer death for each other. The transport ship, Horizon's Edge, dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system 6 months after Hana and Jiho had been declared missing in action. Their stolen Vorthak scout ship had been picked up by a human patrol 3 weeks earlier, but the debriefing process had taken time. Command wanted to understand exactly what had happened before they let the story spread. Now, as their shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere toward the military base in Colorado, both survivors could see crowds gathering below. Word had leaked despite the military's attempts at secrecy, and people wanted to see the two humans who had supposedly conquered death itself. "Look at that," Jiho said, pressing his face to the small window. "There must be thousands of people. Down there." Hana sat quietly in her seat, still processing everything that had changed since her resurrection. The doctors had run every test they could think of, trying to understand what dying and coming back had done to her brain. The results were inconclusive, but one thing was certain. She was different now. Faster reflexes, enhanced pattern recognition, and complete immunity to any form of psychic or technological mind intrusion they could devise. "Are you ready for this?" Jiho asked her, as the shuttle touched down. She smiled, the same expression that had terrified the Vorthak guards during their escape. "I died and came back to life. I think I can handle a press conference." The ceremony was smaller than the crowds outside demanded, but it was broadcast across human space and beyond. Admiral Chen stood at the podium, reading from prepared remarks about courage and determination. But everyone was really waiting to hear from Hana and Jiho themselves. When it was finally her turn to speak, Hana stepped up to the microphone and looked out at the assembly of military officers, government officials, and media representatives. Her words were simple, but they carried across the galaxy. "6 months ago I died," she said. "My heart stopped, my brain shut down, and by every medical definition I was gone. But Jiho didn't give up on me. He refused to accept that death was final. That's what makes us human. We never abandon each other, no matter how hopeless things seem." In the weeks that followed, that speech was translated into hundreds of alien languages and broadcast across known space. But it was the smaller stories that really spread the legend. Tales of human rescue missions, of crews who flew into impossible dangers to save a single missing person, of medics who fought for hours to revive patients that other species would have given up on immediately. The diplomatic effects were immediate and far-reaching. The Vorthak Empire, once eager for conflict with the expanding human territories, suddenly became much more interested in negotiation. Their ambassador to the Galactic Council made an unprecedented statement, acknowledging that they had underestimated certain aspects of human resilience. Other species were even more direct in their policy changes. The Zalani Republic, which had been building military defenses against human expansion, instead opened diplomatic channels and proposed joint research projects. The Krillian Syndicate began offering humans exclusive trading rights in several key sectors. "They're afraid of us now," observed Commander Torres during a strategy meeting at Fleet Headquarters. "Not because we're more powerful than them, but because they can't understand us." "Fear can be useful," replied Admiral Chen, "but respect is better, and that's what we're really earning here." The legend continued to grow with every human rescue mission, every impossible recovery, every time someone refused to give up on a fallen comrade. Alien civilizations began studying human medical techniques, trying to understand how they managed to bring back the dead so regularly. What they discovered was that it wasn't magic or advanced technology. It was simply the absolute refusal to accept defeat when someone's life was at stake. In the outer colonies, human settlements found themselves receiving unexpected aid from alien neighbors who had previously been hostile or indifferent. Trade routes that had been closed to human ships suddenly opened up. Diplomatic meetings that had been stalled for years made rapid progress. Hannah, now promoted to major and assigned to the diplomatic corps, often found herself in meetings with alien officials who looked at her with a mixture of awe and unease. They knew her story. Everyone in the galaxy knew her story by now. She was the human who had died and come back, proof that her species would literally fight death itself rather than abandon one of their own. During one particularly important negotiation with the Vorthak trade delegation, their lead representative finally asked the question that had been bothering his people for months. "Major Hannah," he said, his mandibles clicking nervously, "is it true that all humans possess this ability to return from death?" She considered the question seriously before answering. "No. What we all possess is the determination never to let each other go without a fight. That's not about defeating death, that's about being human." The Vorthak delegation exchanged glances, their alien expressions unreadable. But when they signed the trade agreement an hour later, it was on terms far more favorable to humanity than anyone had expected. Outside the negotiation room, Jiho was waiting with a smile. "How did it go?" "Better than expected," Hannah replied. "I think our reputation is opening doors we didn't even know existed." As they walked together through the station's corridors, past windows showing the vast expanse of space beyond, both of them understood that their escape from that Vorthak prison ship had changed more than just their own lives. It had changed how the entire galaxy saw humanity. They were no longer just another young species reaching for the stars. They were the people who refused to let each other die, who would fight impossible odds for the sake of a single life. In a universe where most civilizations accepted death as an inevitable endpoint, humans had become the species that said, "Not today," and meant it. The legend would continue to grow, carried by every human ship that ventured into the dark, spread by every story of determination and sacrifice that reached alien ears. And at its heart would always be the simple truth that Hannah had spoken at that press conference, that being human meant never giving up on each other, no matter how hopeless things seemed. In the end, that might be humanity's greatest weapon. Not advanced technology or superior firepower, but the absolute certainty that no human would ever face death alone as long as another human drew breath to save them.